And the question that has been raised is the perennial one. People suffer. People do horrendous things to each other. But I'm living in a world where I can condemn it and say, hold on, patience, confidence, faith, it will be put right. You're saying it will never be put right, and that cuts the nerve of being able to say there's anything wrong with it now.
And I must interject if I could. My question was, what hope and dignity do your philosophy offer to people who are suffering? What you're saying is not an answer to that question.
Look, being an atheist is only to say that one doesn't believe there is a supernatural dimension to the cosmos or to human existence. It doesn't commit you to any one moral or political or ethical or ideological view. It just says, let's suppose, what seems likeliest, there isn't a supernatural intervening power. It does involve, one of the reasons I think it may have a very slight moral edge, however, is that it does involve accepting conclusions that may be unwelcome. Okay? I don't particularly want my own death to be succeeded by annihilation and my return to atoms. It's not what I wish for myself, but I'm not going to say I don't believe it because I don't like it, because that would be babyish, wouldn't it? Nobody argues like that. There's such a thing as evidence as well. If the evidence is that there is a sky full of divinity over Auschwitz, as Douglas believes, then I think it's legitimate to ask, what is that sky thinking when it's looking down on Auschwitz? May we inquire? That's before I ask, how does Doug know this?
My sky disapproves. Yes. Your sky doesn't care.
But the disapproval doesn't seem to have carried very much weight.
Your sky over Auschwitz doesn't care. So the question then arises, why do you care?
Well, at least it doesn't watch.
No, why do you care?
No, at least, excuse me, your sky watches with folded arms. And possibly with pleasure. We don't know what it's... How can we know? Who in this room is going to claim to know what God is thinking and feeling?
So what is yours?
Do you have the nerve to do this? I bet you don't.
What does your sky think?
Well, I say there's only sky.
Right. So
we have to be brothers one with another.
Why?
We have to fight this off. We have to outlearn the precepts of racism. We have to, for our own survival. We have to, for our children's sake. We have quite enough motive, without resort to the supernatural, to say why we nominate certain things as wicked and inhuman, and know what we mean when we say these things. But your sky looks at Auschwitz and says, I wonder how it's going on today. That raises at least the possibility that the sky likes what it sees. You can't know that they're not enjoying it.
Except God gave us a book.
Hey, Herr Kreisel, why did you go downstairs and do it to her again? We'll watch that. Would you watch that? I'm asking you. Well, why are you saying it's ethical to postulate that somebody does?
I think you're making a good point here, and Christopher, in the sense that Christians, I'll just speak for Christians in the limited experience I have with Christians who are suffering. When bad things do happen to them, a very natural response is to question, God, why are you allowing this to happen? Why is this happening? Why aren't you doing something? You can read the Psalms and see that over and over, where God's people wonder what God is doing. So that is a perfectly natural response. However, I don't believe that is the...
It shouldn't be natural for adults. They shouldn't say, why is heaven doing this to me? Why do they think heaven even knows they're there?
Jim?
It's babyish to think like that.
This was my father's issue as well. If there is a God, why would he allow 300 men to be abandoned on an island and only 17 survive? It's been an issue and a struggle for me as a pastor for 25 years as well. I want God to intervene when people misuse their freedom to do horrendous things. I absolutely want God to do that. If I were God, I would intervene. If I saw someone misusing their freedom to do absolutely horrendous things. So then we ask, all right, now where do we draw the line? Let's say that we draw the line that God must intervene if someone is about to misuse their freedom to commit murder. I don't want anyone to be able to murder my sons. Well, neither do I want anyone to harm my sons. So now we step the line back. No, I want God to intervene whenever anyone is going to misuse their freedom in a way that will hurt my sons physically. Well, I don't want anyone to hurt my sons morally or personally or emotionally, and so I'm going to draw the line there. I don't want anyone to hurt my sons at all, so now I'm going to draw the line there. At what point, once God starts intervening in free use of human will, does God stop intervening? The Bible tells us that God weeps, God grieves at the outrages that he sees happen among his children. I think I can answer your question, Christopher. How does God feel? God is a father. And as a father, God grieves as his children are hurting. He cries as they cry. He hurts as they hurt. If he intervenes by removing freedom, where does he stop? That's the issue that has troubled me all across my pastoral experience. And that's my response to the issue today.
And if he can intervene and determine, then in what sense are we free? We're the properties of an eternal Father. That's the terminus of unfreedom by definition. There will be no, when I'm asked if we have free will, I always have the same response. Of course we do, we have no choice. You say we've got free will because we've been given it by the boss. Come on. That's hopeless. Morally hopeless, intellectually incoherent.
May I respond to that?
Please.
By all
Thank you
means.
very much. Thank you. The question of sovereignty and freedom is one that has troubled Christians, of course, across all the generations of Christian theology. As we understand it, Christopher, at least how Orthodox Christianity answers the question, God, because He is sovereign and absolute, wants a relationship with us. He knows that relationship of worship must depend upon our choosing worship, or else it's not worship, it's not love, it's not relationship. And so God chooses to give us that freedom and chooses to honor that freedom. It is God's sovereign choice to give me freedom and to honor the freedom that He has given me. That makes Him no less sovereign, and at the same time allows me the freedom that He has chosen as my Creator to give to me. It's the same thing parents do with their children.
You know the mind of God, in other words.
It's the same thing parents do with their children. When we give our children limited freedom, we give them autonomy so that they can make the right choices and they can grow into the adulthood we wish for them. But all the while, what they are choosing is within the context of our sovereignty. That's how sovereignty and freedom work together in such a way that God is sovereign, and yet we are free.
So you know the mind of God.
I know what God has revealed of His mind. I know how God has revealed Himself in Scripture, how God has revealed Himself ultimately in His Son, when He became one of us, that we might become one with Him. I could never propose that I myself, unaided, could ever know the mind of God. Religion is our effort to climb up to God. Christianity is God coming down to us to make Himself known to us so that He would reveal His mind to us.
Thank you. I'd like to shift gears slightly. Did you want to have a...
No, I think honestly, you've been very kind. I've said.
Okay.
I would like to add an addendum to this. It seems to me that there are two questions here that are getting blurred together. One is the existence of innocent suffering compatible with Christian theism? Or is Christian theism some way incoherent, internally incoherent? And it seems to me that Denison and Wilson have both suggested ways in which we can think of God Christianly, in which innocent suffering could exist and would be consistent with the character of God. They talked about the need to permit human freedom, and you admitted that constant intervention would rob human beings of significant moral freedom. And then they talked about justice in the afterlife, desert and punishment, that would be consistent with showing that Christian theism is coherent as a worldview, even though there is innocent suffering. That's one question. Then the other question is, but how do you know Christian theism is true? And that seems to be the question you slide to, is when they first explain the coherence of Christian theism, they say, but how do you know that's true? Now that's quite a different question. That would be the kinds of arguments and evidences that Lee talked about and that I talked about. But would you admit that if Christian theism is true, that it is a coherent view given the sorts of innocent suffering that we talked about?
If you make the relevant assumptions, yes.
Okay.
Then it's internally fairly consistent, I think.
Okay.
If heaven waited until 2,000 years ago to intervene in the affairs of a species that's at least 100, probably nearly a quarter of a million years old, that let it rot for 2,000 years and then said, time to intervene, but only in very illiterate parts of the Middle East, and by human sacrifice, and that ought to cure it. That'll mean they can be claimed to be saved. If you believe anything like that, then the rest, I guess, more or less does follow. To me, it makes absolutely no sense at all. It's a white noise proposition. Doug, now you've made me answer. I should say I have to return Doug's question to me in a similar form. He says, if I think that the world is only material, why should I care? Well, even if my children are only material, I still do care for them. Oddly enough, I seem to be programmed to do so, and for other people too. I don't feel any need to justify myself on this point. It is a fact. We would be moral if there were no God.
So you think that your care for your children is on the level of physics?
We could and would be. No, I don't. You call it physics, not me. But if it's the case that
you said you were programmed.
I see hardwired might be good.
By whom?
Who hardwired you?
Who knows?
But doesn't Christianity offer
the same as hardwires the orangutan in the California Zoo who picked up the baby that fell into the pit and walked it over to its mother who was weeping and banging her head against the bars.
You're right.
A lot of animals have solidarity. They form families, they look out for each other, they have kinship ties, they have